But guys, we have been trained in a society and in a culture that we deserve all of these things. But to understand what thanksgiving is and to understand what it means to be thankful and what Paul is referring the people to here, we must understand what thanksgiving is. Or what does it mean to be thankful? Biblically, to be thankful means that it is an overflowing gratitude towards God, expressing itself towards God for the undeserved benefits that we have received from Him. You see, that's where we have to first start. We have to begin there. Because our wrong thinking in our culture and in our society has so affected the church's thinking. And we really don't understand what it means to be thankful because we, for some reason, believe that everything that God has done for us, everything that He has bestowed upon us, is something that we deserve. We're trained from the earliest possible age that we deserve all these things. And we're trained that God did all these things for us. And both of those statements are false and not true. And so for us to really understand what Paul was commanding the Ephesian church and what he is commanding us today is to be thankful to God, we must understand first and foremost all of these benefits that has come upon us is undeserving. And we're going to look at that today. They're undeserving. Guys, if God gave us what we truly deserved, it would be punishment and His holy wrath for an eternity. You see, we don't like to hear that because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't like to hear that we're undeserving people. We don't like to hear that really what we deserve from a holy God is His punishment and His wrath. But guys, if you're really going to be thankful and if your heart is going to be overflowing with gratitude towards God, you must settle in your mind and heart that this is something that you did not deserve. All the things that Paul has listed and wrote to the Ephesians about, he is pointing them back to and saying, the reason you should be so thankful is these things are undeserving. God has given you the complete opposite of what you deserve. And I believe that that's why so many professing believers today are not overwhelmed with thanksgiving. Their hearts are not overflowing with gratitude to God because for some reason they think that everything that they have and that God has done was for them and because they deserved it. And it's because of that wrong thinking today that we do more complaining than we do giving thanks to God. And it's because of that wrong thinking today that God is not the center of all things in His church, but man is. Guys, we must change our wrong thinking. We must correct our wrong thinking with the Word of God, and we must be God-centered. And we must understand that God does everything He does for His own glory. And we must understand that everything that we have that God has bestowed upon us is undeserving. Those two things right there should drive us to be thankful. We must understand that every benefit that we have, every benefit that God has bestowed upon us, He has done for His own goodwill and pleasure. And I'm telling you, I spent much time this morning on my face, weeping and crying as I reflected upon the benefits that God has given me that I do not deserve. I want you to answer this question in your own mind and heart before we even begin the sermon. If I ask you today, what are you the most thankful for? What would be your response? And I can almost guarantee you for all of us, when we're asked what are we most thankful for, immediately these things come to our minds. Our families, our homes, our jobs, our material possessions. When, guys, the thing that we should value the most and the thing that we should be the most thankful for is Christ. But many times, we don't see Him as very valuable. And if you have the wrong thinking that you deserve salvation for some reason and everything that Christ has accomplished on your part, then you will not value Him. And you will not value grace, and you will not be thankful for these things. You see, we must hear these hard things. We must be confronted with our sinfulness. We must be confronted with what we really deserve for us to really see how valuable Christ really is. Guys, we should value Christ more than even our families, more than our children, more than our homes, more than our jobs, more than the material possessions we have. Because what we value the most normally are things that are going to pass away. We must, once again, reflect upon Christ and all of the great benefits that God has accomplished for His people through Christ if we're truly going to be thankful. And that's what Paul was doing here. To understand what Paul was saying, you have to go back through the whole book of Ephesians. And you have to understand that Paul is not pointing them to their families or to material possessions. He's not pointing them to these things that we see as valuable today to be thankful for. He's pointing them to God, to Christ. And that's what you should be thankful for. All of the great benefits that has been accomplished for you through Christ, that is what should make you to be thankful. So he gives instructions on being thankful today. He gave it to the Ephesians. He gives it to us today. And he begins in verse 20 and he says, always give thanks. He instructed the Ephesians on when to be thankful. He didn't instruct the Ephesians to be thankful when things are going the way that you want them to go. He didn't say to the Ephesians, you be thankful when you're feeling good or when everything's going the way that you've pictured it that it should be going. He didn't say to them, be thankful when God has blessed you materially or that you have everything you could possibly want. He said to them, the when you're to be thankful, it's always, at all times, is what that means. That means in the most difficult times in your life, you're to be thankful. In the most painful, hurtful times of your life, you're to be thankful. In the times where you want to complain against God because things aren't going the way that you desire them to go, you're to be thankful. You see, I've been there many times. Many times I've been there to where I wanted to complain against God instead of being thankful. And I was only thankful in the times where things were going my way. Paul instructed the Ephesians to be thankful at all times, in all things. And as I read and studied this, I realized how far I am from this. How far I am from always giving thanks to God at all times. Because, see, that's what Paul was instructing them to do. He was telling them, you be thankful always at all times. It doesn't matter what you're going through. It doesn't matter how hard it is. You be thankful. Remember the context of this. Where was Paul when he was writing to the church in Ephesus? He was in a Roman prison. Here this man was writing to the Ephesians and he is saying to them, I'm in a prison cell and I'm telling you that you're to always be thankful to God at all times. How in the world could Paul write such things? And how in the world could this man who is suffering at the hands of wicked men and suffering in jail, how in the world could he say to the church, always at all times be thankful? And how could he be thankful in that time? Because I'm right there with you in your thinking. It's wrong thinking, but I'm right there with you. If I was thrown into jail for preaching the gospel, I would be complaining every second of the day. And I would be saying, get me a lawyer, get me out of here. I did nothing wrong. I deserve better than this. God, I'm your called man. You've gifted me. I shouldn't be in jail. But what did Paul say later on in Philippians? Paul said that he knew that him being in jail was the sovereign plan of God. And that's how he could be thankful always. And that's how we can be thankful always, because we understand the sovereignty of God.